Welcome to Piedmonsters, the Piedmont Pilot Podcast brought to you by your Piedmont MEC. I'm your host, Megan Johnson, Charlotte First Officer and member of the Communications Committee. Today, we're discussing a very important topic, one I know that everyone is curious about, the upcoming transition to a preferential bidding system, or PBS, and the process of that implementation. I will be joined by Brandon Hagy, who we met previously as the Charlotte Captain Rep, but he is also the PBS Committee Chair, as well as Jay Weatherman, who is our Negotiating Committee Chair. Before we get to that, a few quick updates. The Phillies Pilot Unity Building event is this Monday, September 23rd. We will have some tickets set aside for reserve pilots who do not end up with scheduled flying. If you are on reserve and would like to be added to that list, please email Davis Bunting. If you are able to attend, we would love to see your posts on Instagram. Please follow and tag us at Piedmont Pilots. Active members in good standing are eligible for election to the Philadelphia-Harrisburg Local Executive Council, LEC 29. If you are interested, please declare your willingness to serve at alpa.org/votenet by September 23rd. The election will be completed November 7th, and the term runs from March 1st, 2025 through February 29th, 2028. For more information, check the Piedmont Gazette or contact a union representative. Speaking of elections, as we approach United States general elections on November 5th, please plan accordingly to exercise your right to vote. In North Carolina, the deadline to register to vote online is October 11th. Early voting begins Thursday, October 17th, and continues until November 2nd. In-person registration is available during early voting. If you choose to vote by mail ballot, the deadline to request that ballot is October 29th. Those ballots may be dropped off to voting locations during early voting or returned by mail. If submitting by mail, they must be received by the County Board of Elections no later than November 5th. North Carolina voter resources can be found at ncsbe.gov. In Pennsylvania, the deadline to register to vote online and in person is October 21st. Like North Carolina, if you choose to vote absentee or vote by mail, the deadline to request your ballot is October 29th, 1 week before Election Day. Ballots may be delivered in person to the county election office or designated return site or returned by mail. Pennsylvania voters have the option of requesting, completing, and submitting their mail ballot in person at designated county offices. Please contact your county's Board of Elections for details and locations. Also, like North Carolina, ballots must be received by the Board of Elections no later than November 5th. Pennsylvania voter resources can be found at pa.gov. I will include the links to both state voter websites in the show notes. Regardless of your state of residence, you can find your state's voter information via Google search or websites like vote.org. Thank you for sticking with me as I share those important updates, and as always, thank you for listening. Please subscribe to our channel wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. I already mentioned our Instagram at Piedmont Pilots, but we would love it if you followed us there as well. And lastly, if you have any comments, thoughts, feedback, questions, or suggestions for the podcast, please email us at PDTpodcast@alpa.org. And now it's time to hear from Brandon and Jay all about PBS and the status of our tentative agreement to implement that system. Hello, and welcome to Piedmonsters. As always, I'm your host, Megan Johnson, and today I am joined by two of our very important representatives. We have Jay Weatherman, the Negotiations Committee Chair, and Brandon Hagy, who you met previously as the Charlotte Captain Rep, but he is also our PBS Committee Chair. Gentlemen, if I could ask you two to introduce yourselves very quickly for the listeners.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jay Weatherman. I'm a DEC. I've been here just shy of 2 years, and it's been a busy year in negotiations, and we've got a lot to talk about.
And I'm Brandon Hagy. I'm the Captain Rep in Charlotte, as well as a PBS Chair. We've been doing a lot of work for PBS over the last year, and looking forward to talk to you about it.
Thank you, gentlemen. And if you could just talk a little bit about your background and how you got involved with union work, but specifically with the committee's that we're discussing today. Again, Brandon, I know we talked about your role as the Charlotte Captain Rep previously, but if you guys could touch a little bit on how you got involved with the negotiations and PBS committees, that would be great.
Well, I came from 25 years at Delta Airlines and took early retirement during COVID. Had the opportunity to go do other things, of course, loved flying and was really enjoying my career, but there's other things to do, and I had an opportunity, so I took it. Spent a couple of years not doing much related to airline work, and then my daughter became a Piedmont co-pilot, and I was seduced to come back, so to speak, come fly with her. So I joined as a DEC in June of 2023 and got to fly with her a few times. I served on the Delta MEC for a number of years and did a lot of work during contract negotiations back in the year 2000, the big contract 2000 that kind of set the mark for pay rates going into the year 2000. I was able to, during OE, I got to fly with Michael Carpenter, who was the MEC negotiations chair at that time, and he was able to spend an entire month telling me how I needed to come be on his committee. After that, I thought about it for a while and decided, you know what, if I'm going to be here, I might as well jump right back in. So got on the committee, and Michael immediately went back to teaching full-time, and I was asked to step into the chairman's role. So we spent almost the last year working up to this PBS TA, and it's been a very busy year for that. We basically, Brandon and I have worked together basically the entire time, spending a week together every month in front of the company trying to hammer out the details of this thing. So now that we've got the TA at least signed by the two parties, we have to get it ratified by the MEC, and then of course they make a decision as to where it goes from there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that summary and update. And Brandon, if you could talk about how you got involved as the chair of the PBS committee.
I was kind of picked for it back in I don't even know, maybe last year, 2023. I was running for the FO rep and lost it to Ravi Thacker. And then when he became the FO rep, they were talking in an MEC meeting that they needed a PBS chair, and he recommended me for it. And I knew most of the people there in the MEC already, so they agreed and selected me for it. And I had no idea what that was going to entail. I had no idea what PBS was, so I had to kind of put smarter people in front of me. So we went out, started recruiting people that had previous PBS experience, and scoured through lots of research, lots of training, and lots of conversations with people at different airlines that were experts at PBS, and kind of learned how to do it all and what it was all about. And we've been working on it ever since.
Well, thank you very much for all the research that I know you've done and for the extensive work that I know you two have put in over the last year or so. So just as we get into deeper conversations about the status of everything, what the long-term effects are going to be, just a quick aside for anyone who's listening who might not be aware, PBS stands for Preferential Bidding System and TA stands for Tentative Agreement. So the company will enter into a tentative agreement until all of the final legal language can be finalized in an LOA, a letter of agreement. As we note right now, it is an ever-changing process. All of our LOAs are important. They do affect your contract, and each LOA supersedes previous LOAs and kind of builds upon any previous work that has been done. So until finalized LOA, including PBS, can be implemented, we are currently working on a TA, a tentative agreement for that process. The TA was agreed upon in June of this year as a way to implement PBS. PBS implementation was agreed upon in LOA 49 back in 2022, along with some gains for the pilots that would be in effect with PBS. When LOA 52 was ratified in 2023, the company went ahead and put some of those benefits in place for the pilots at that point, rather than waiting for PBS. That included moving to a minimum of 12 days off per month, as well as holiday pay. So this is actually a process that has been going on for quite some time. And my question for the two of you is, what is that timeline and process look like from the beginning of an inception of an idea of something that the company or the union wants to implement through working through the TA and the LOA process? And what does that entire lifespan to get us to an LOA look like?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that back in 2022, an agreement was reached to negotiate a PBS system, which, is before I was at the airline and probably before most of us were. And it was part of these agreements that set in motion the higher pay rates and the expansion of flying that we've seen. So it's important to note that going into this, the PBS negotiations here, we didn't have the option to say, nah, we'd rather stay under our regular system. It was already agreed over 2 years ago now that we would negotiate a PBS system, and there was give and take for that. And so the company expected us to come to the table in good faith to reach an agreement. So our job walking in there, my job, I look at myself as a producer. The PBS committee, Brandon and his committee, and Brandon as an MEC member, they are consumers. They are the end buyer of the product. That what they do is they tell me what they want, tell me what's important, tell my committee what they want to see the product look like. And we get together among ourselves and start fleshing out ideas for how to get these items in a finished product. And I wrap everything up and I start talking to the company about, okay, well, I see that you have these problems. You want a PBS system. We want it to help you get that PBS system. But we have also some other ideas about things that are really important to our pilots that we would like that are corollary. They may or may not be directly related to PBS, but realizing that in order to get a deal done, there has to be give and take. And so it's really important to find out what the other party needs and try to meet their needs as best you can, while also ensuring that your needs get met. So it's a mutual path of trying to find out where the important things are, and also trying to get your important goals met in the negotiation. So it's a lot of give and take. And then when we reach the agreement, the tentative agreement, that's just an initial framework. It's kind of funny when we reached that TA, it was a huge relief because we had gotten a lot of what I would consider good positive movement for the Piedmont pilots. But that was just the beginning of it. Now it went to the lawyers and went to the company, and they've been going back and forth writing actual TA language or LOA language for the PBS agreement. And then that goes to the MEC, and Brandon gets another swipe at it as an MEC member. As a producer of the product, I take direction from the MEC, go to the company, and I reach the best agreement I think that we possibly can. And then I give my analysis of everything that went on to the MEC. And that's kind of where we're at now. The MEC is close to having a final product with contract language written, and they're going to be working on the pros and cons of the actual final written language here in the next couple of months, I believe.
Awesome. Sounds good. And I know that everyone is actively looking forward to seeing what that language is going to be as it comes down the line. So given all of that information, I want to pivot a little bit to Brandon and digging a little bit more deeply into PBS, what it is, what it means, and how this is going to be different for our pilots moving forward. So what is a preferential bidding system?
A preferential bidding system is basically a high-level sort function, kind of like we have with Flicka, but Flicka is the way we currently use Flicka is for sorting lines that are already pre-built with pairings, and then people bid on the line. With NavBlue and PBS, the pairings will still be generated by the company using whatever parameters they set forth. And I know they work with our scheduling committee members, and between that joint effort between the company and scheduling committee, they'll build the pairings, which will then be uploaded into the NavBlue software, where then the end user, the pilots, and ultimately flight attendants at some point will start using that system to basically build their schedule, whatever schedule they can hold based off of their preferences as well as seniority. Some of the big differences between them are, let's say an example, you like to overnight in Harrisburg every week. Well, a lot of the pairings in the system have Harrisburg overnights, but you might only have one Harrisburg overnight per month spread out over a bunch of different lines. With PBS, every single pairing that you do could have a Harrisburg overnight, so you could be home an additional 5-6 nights a month instead of only having that one.
So long term, or I guess even short term, the goal is to allow pilots to have more say in their individual trips and to have more flexibility in how the monthly lines are built based on pilot set parameters and sorting in the software system. Is that correct? Is that my understanding?
Yeah. Whoever's using the system, the pilots and flight attendants, will be able to go through and put whatever parameters they want for whichever pairings they want. If the commutability is what they want, they can find trips that start really late in the evening and end super early in the morning, or they can pick specific overnights. During the negotiations, it was kind of talked about possibly having people have a no-fly list or buddy bidding. So we'll see how that works out. If you like fly with certain people, maybe you can fly a lot more with those people. It's just a very high-level sort function.
And the whole mindset as we went through the negotiations period, just to tag on to what you were saying, Brandon, is, we were trying to give pilots optionality in your scheduling because if you have any experience here at Piedmont, you know that sometimes you really don't have any options. And so when you look through the TA, and it's a very complicated document, we went very granular into the details to try and first do no harm and make sure that everybody's seniority is honored to the utmost ability. And one of the requests we got from the MEC was that do not harm vacation. So we pushed very hard to substantively, I would say, if not 100%, 98% keep vacation that'll operate in a similar fashion as far as value and for days off that you would get under the current system. So we were very cognizant as we went through that, but we also wanted to make sure that the pilots had options. With any negotiation, there's give and take. When I was offered the negotiation chairmanship, I had to sit down with everybody and say, listen, hey, what do you really want out of these negotiations? Well, we knew what the company wanted. They wanted to get this across the goal line. And I've worked under a PBS system before, it's difficult at first, it's complicated, and sometimes you can kind of trick yourself as you learn the system. So it behooves everyone to learn everything they can about the system when it comes online. But we got the message loud and clear from the company that there's just no more money, and not any substantive amount of money that they were willing to spend to get this done. That, we had made a commitment through a previous LOA to commit to negotiating this PBS system in good faith.
Right.
So that's what they expected us to do. But I also said, okay, how about this? What if we sat down and find these low cost or no cost items? I call it the low hanging fruit in our contract that would really make our quality of lives as working line pilots for Piedmont better on a daily basis. Things like you can't drop a trip currently. Things like your sick leave can be very punitive. It's not contractual in nature. You're subject to discipline for using too much sick leave. We went out and we'd sit and we'd talk, and we came up with ways to kind of work around the monetary guidelines that American Airlines has set some goals that financially they want to see certain things. So we had limitations, and that's true for any interim negotiation process. There's just not a lot of money available. You got to get things done by what I like to call small ball negotiations. You're not going to hit a lot of home runs, but you want to get a single every now and again. You want to get people on base. You want to move the ball forward as wherever you can. So we worked really hard, and Brandon was key in this. We bounced ideas endlessly off each other and off other members of the committees. What else can we push for that the company is not going to have heartburn because it doesn't cost a lot of money? Now, they did have heartburn with some things because it means control, and they were losing some control of things like the sick leave issue. Not having a contractual sick leave program is terrible. It's terrible. We were able to convince them that it was not only in their best interest to do it as a contractual and a non-FOM policy, but they're not the first ones doing it. We're actually a laggard in that. Using these gentle but logical arguments where we weren't going to cost a lot of money, but it would make a big difference for people's quality of lives. That's where I think the real winner in this TA is. The PBS is going to help both sides. It's going to be a huge efficiency for the company. We know that. But it's also going to help people control their schedules quite a bit. If you want certain days off, you can get them generally. If you want certain types of trips, certain types of flying, you can bid for that without having to commit to somebody else's idea of what line you can.
Yeah, that's awesome. And as a person who likes to exercise the maximum amount of control over my schedule, and I live in the 48-hour period and the GCOMs every single day, dropping and adding things until I get as close to exactly what I want as possible, I am very much looking forward to this. But you started to touch on the give and take and the other things that are included in this specific TA outside of just the PBS. And one of the things you mentioned was changes to the sick leave policy. So can you just really quickly explain, outside of PBS, what is also going to be included in this TA and what those changes are specifically?
Well, at first glance, they seem somewhat minor, but they are significant in my opinion. And here's why. Initially, it's not its current book. You can't really drop any trips. There's a moratorium on dropping below guarantee. That doesn't make any sense. It not only allows you to not swap, or it stops you from swapping, it also stops you from dropping. Now, I had a discussion with Eddie and Matt where I got them to say, we don't care if a pilot wants to drop to zero, as long as schedule integrity is protected, we don't care. And I'm like, sold. We'll take that. And so that was a baseline of several discussions where, we had to start defining what schedule integrity was. How do we schedule the airline? How do we make sure that there are enough reserves without having too many reserves? And to be honest with you, it's been a challenge getting them to open up about how the scheduling department works. And I know that there's
That
some
is personally
ongoing
information that I
problems.
am dying to know and
Aren't
understand.
we
And I
all?
have so many questions.
We all do, believe me. And we had the scheduling supervisors come in and talk to us. So in the end, what we were able to do with that is to set up a future working group where our scheduling folks are going to be spending more time with their scheduling folks, and we're going to be able to get a better look at how this system works, and
That sounds awesome.
an input in, why do we have 18 people on reserve, no open time flying, and yet the thing is red. That makes no sense. So we don't have transparency. We're working on that, and we got our foot in the door with that. I think that's a very significant gain that we got. And then the sick leave issue was a significant gainer for me because, Piedmont has traditionally been a starter airline, an educational airline, a training airline, if you will.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. It's not a negative thing. It's just a lot of people come here as their first real job out of flight school. And so you have a younger workforce per se that doesn't have significant medical issues. But in recent years, you've had an influx of DECs and older FOs, high-time FOs, that are in their 50s and even in their 60s. So the pace of the operation is significantly different than what many people of an older generation are used to. I'm not really talking about myself, of course. I would never say that, but so there's a lot of adjustment, and the reality is the older the pilot is, the more sick leave they're going to use, and the system is set up now where there's kind of a wink and a nod on how sick leave is used right now. As long as you don't use beyond your 11th occurrence, there really is no impetus. But if you are sick, say you have COVID and you lose a week and a half, and then a couple of months later you have the flu, all of a sudden you're getting a Section 19 because you've been sick twice. And I felt that was inappropriate. And I'm certainly not the only one who's brought it up to them, but it was
and I feel
something that
especially given the last several years, obviously global pandemic, I think people have become a lot more aware of sickness and how important it is to call out sick if you are sick and not risk spreading illness to
That's
other
exactly
people.
right.
And I think that's something that I want us to encourage among our pilots, because I don't want to show up to work and work with someone who's sick.
That's exactly right. And we want to encourage people to not come to work when they're sick. So the movement from a punitive disciplinary-based sick leave system to a contractual, as long as you get a doctor's note, and you'll be able to get that through teledoc, there will be no occurrence with your sick leave usage. However, it's still, we're not able to get everything. This is a nice little single off to the right field. If you call in sick without using a doctor's note, it will count as an occurrence. And, again, foot in the door. We're making progress, and that's been the whole point.
That's awesome.
So these are some significant changes that are coming that, based on the calls and emails I've gotten when we wrote the comms about this and it came out, people were like, we want this now. We're very eager to have this now.
Yeah,
and they
for
thought
sure.
it was
That's a huge update.
They thought it was already coming, and they were upset when, no, we've still got a process to go through.
So I got some legal language to work through.
Exactly.
We're getting there.
And then we one thing that really does need to be mentioned is that the extension of the pay rates out to 2026, December 31st of 2026, was an important thing. And,
Yes,
it just takes the worry off of everybody's back.
absolutely.
And all that does is push it out. We'll still have annual increases out to that point. And again, December 31st of 2026, the pay rates don't go away, but the company does have the option to go back to the old pay rates at that point. And just like they had the deadline that passed in August. So that was a significant gain as well. And everybody wanted that. Both sides wanted to do that. So
Absolutely. Yes, the sick pay is great. Having my actual paycheck extended long term is definitely a very reassuring feeling. So very much appreciate that being included long term. So thank you guys for that. Brandon, time to pivot a little bit back to PBS and try to hammer out some of these questions and some of the details. We talked about basically it would be a new software system, building a new system for bidding and scheduling and whatnot. Once the TA is agreed upon, what does that implementation process look like?
Well, like Jay mentioned, once the TA is ratified, and it's got some work to do before that too, it has to go to the pilot group, or it's correct, sorry, it has to go to the MEC first, and Jay and the negotiators will come through and talk to MEC to brief them or present it to them. And then the MEC will vote to either ratify it in-house or send it to the pilot group. If it gets voted to send it to the pilot group, then the PBS committee and MEC and everybody will have to organize road shows to go educate the pilot group on what the entire PBS LOA means to them. That way they can make a informed decision on whether or not they vote yes or no. And if it gets implemented, then as soon as that LOA gets signed into effect, it will be sent to NAVBLUE. And then NAVBLUE will put us on a queue to program whatever they have to program for anything that's in our agreement that's not industry standard. If it's industry standard, it'll be an off-the-shelf program that they can just implement right away. But there's going to be some things that aren't straight off the shelf. And we went to a conference last year for PBS, and at that point, back in January of 22, I think it was about a 4 to 6 month wait period until they were actually able to program it for the specific airlines.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure if that's changed at all, but
Okay.
if it's the same, it'll be 4 to 6 months. And then once all that is finished and said and done, then it'll get sent back to us where we'll be able to test it and then roll out a parallel bid process. The testing phase will last about a month, maybe a little bit less, and then it'll have 3 months of parallel bidding where we'll be doing more road shows to go out and teach pilots how to use the system and to bid both using Flicka as well as NavBlue at the same time. That way they can kind of get an idea of if they bid their system or they bid their schedule this way, are they getting the kind of results that they are expecting moving forward as well? But it's
Going to be a lot more complicated just because there's more moving parts.
Just something to think about with PBS. It's if you're familiar with logic systems, or if you've heard the phrase Boolean logic, kind of like a decision tree, so to speak. If then if A, then B, if not A, then C, and so on down the line, and you build what's called the decision ladder. They use different phraseology for different systems. And what it'll do is the system will try to build you a line based on your parameters. Like, I want Saturdays off, I want to commute in on Monday, and I want to be done by 3 p.m. on Thursday for every trip, and I want this and I want that, and it's going to look through, and if you're senior enough and they have trips that'll do those things, it'll award you those trips and it'll move on to the next person. And but if not, say it can't meet all of those things, you can say else next, and it'll send to another bid group, and it'll start doing your secondary bid options, whatever you want it to do. If that doesn't work, you can have another bid group or tertiary, and even at the bottom you can say else reserve. So if I don't get what I want as a line holder, then I want these days off as reserves. There's a lot of different layers and a lot of complexity that you can build in. And I'll tell you what the secret is that people try to get too tricky with it, and they end up not getting, somebody else gets exactly what they want. And it's really easy to do when you start building multiple lines of Boolean logic decision making into your bidding. But it's going to be a learning process for everybody. What you'll find is that once you learn the ins and outs of it, you'll have much better control of your quality of work life than you do now. And that's what I'm really looking forward to for everyone. It's a process. It takes a long time to get it started and to get it implemented and then to get it learned. But I think there's benefits to doing that.
It sounds complicated. As a nerd, I am super excited to actually dig into it. I will be one of the people that tries to overshoot my shot for sure. And I will end up getting angry at myself for doing it, but I'm sure it'll be great long term.
It's going to behoove everyone to, I mean, if you don't care about your seniority, just don't pay attention. When you're stuck doing things that you don't want to do for a few months, then you'll learn it and learn the lesson. You don't do it till you have to, and then you wish you had. So just a word to the wise.
So then long term, I know we've talked about this in terms of the overall negotiation and also kind of the complexities of the PBS system. But long term, what do we see as the pros and cons for pilots and how it's likely to affect their schedules?
Biggest pro is schedule flexibility. It's going to allow everyone to gain more flexibility. And of course, that's seniority dependent, but the system is very smart. The senior guys will go in and say, I want this, or I don't want this, I want this. And then the next senior person is going to say the same thing, I don't want this, I want this. And the system's going to go through everyone, and it's going to award flying for the first person, then the second person, all the way down the list. The people that are senior aren't specific, meaning if I'm number one in base and I say, I want pairing L1234 that departs on this day. If I say that, then they're going to award it to me. But if I just say, if I'm the number one guy and I say, I want to work Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday every week, I want every weekend off, then it's going to award that. Well, if it awards that flying to me and then it goes to the next person, say Jay's next person in seniority, he says, well, I want something else that's a little bit more specific than what I wanted that was already awarded to me. The system will say, okay, well, I can take this from him and still give him another trip that meets those parameters the senior person said, then to satisfy the needs of both pilots. And it'll continue going through the list that way. So if it could rob flying from someone else up the list to still assign that pilot something else that still meets their needs, then it'll go through and try to get as many people as happy as possible. So that's a huge pro. It's not just one pilot taking a trip and then it's off the table unless they specifically say, I want that trip. That's a big pro.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Cons to it are it's going to be a learning curve. It's going to be a lot of work going through it, trying to educate everyone that wants several months of working out the kinks in it. And not really kinks, but educational purposes.
Yeah.
It's going to take people a long time to do it.
There's also, if I can jump in real quick, another,
of course.
It's not so much a con, but kind of a cautionary tale is that we have to continuously police the algorithm and police the company's interpretation of how they want to implement PBS. Over time, the needs of the company will change, as will the needs of the pilot group. And there's going to be the occasional tweak or change in the numbers and how the algorithm awards trips. And it's just going to be really important that we don't, how do I phrase this? It's going to be really important that we ensure that we are protecting the quality of life gains that we have. One of the big things that we have to do is make sure that, and this is not lost on me, first we must do no harm, and we must do everything we can to protect the quality of life gains that we have.
Well, so kind of, as you mentioned, keeping an eye on things long term, obviously the system is going to be owned by a third-party software company, NavBlue, that we've mentioned previously. Who is responsible for then working with NavBlue long term and monitoring, like you said, the algorithm? Is that something that Brandon, as the PBS Committee Chair, is going to be working on long term, or the company, or both?
It's going to be a joint venture between the PWG, which stands for PBS Working Group. So this could be comprised of members from both ALPA, the ALPA specifically are people from the PBS committee, as well as from the company. Currently, we have the current number of pilots we have now, it's going to be 2 people each month from both the company and the PBS committees. Then as we grow and get more pilots, I forget the exact number it was, but eventually, once you get enough pilots, it'll go up to 3 people per month. And the company will give those pilots time off each month during the entire process of running the bids and everything. And they're going to go work together between ALPA and the company to ensure that everything runs accordingly. And if they have problems, then they'll be able to reach out and talk to NavBlue to fix the issues. During that time, the PWG will be going through running the bids over and over and over again to try to find the best solution each month to get as many people as happy as possible, as well as be as efficient as possible. So it's a win-win for both the company and the pilot group.
Got it. Very cool. Sounds like your work will not be done anytime soon. Sounds like there's a lot to kind of keep an eye on long term. So we talked about how the bidding will work and kind of setting up your parameters. So is it my understanding that moving forward long term, once PBS is fully implemented, once we get through the parallel bidding and the implementation and all of that, the goal and the benefit to the pilots is that also a lot of the bidding process becomes significantly more automated on the pilot's end?
It can be more automated. It could also be a lot more in depth too. It just depends what your goals are. There's going to be a default bid that if you want to, you can just say every month I want to work Monday through Thursday and have Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. And if you're senior and that's all you care about, you can get that. And you can just do your default bid, and every single month it'll just automatically do your default bid. But if you want to get tricky with things and say you really keep an eye on things, a month you notice that there's 4 different trips over 4 different weeks that have a triple Richmond overnight, and you just happen to live in Richmond like I do, I could say I want these specific pairings so I can have every night at home. But that would cause you to keep a bigger eye on it. But it's really no different than the way FLICO works, where you can have a default bid and it'll run quarterly or the same way.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. And then as far as the monthly schedule, as far as when the bid package is released and the timeline of it all and when schedules are finalized, do we envision that changing at all, or is it going to stay the same?
It will change slightly. It's actually going to get more efficient. Our book right now, everything gets published for the line holders, and it just figures out if you're going to be a line holder or a build-up line holder. Well, with PBS, there's going to be no more build-up. It's just going to be line holders and reserve. You're not going to have to go through a 48-hour period the same way we do now. It'll still have a 48-hour period where people can go through seniority order and adjust their schedules. But the difference is with PBS, it's going to assign the reserve pilots their lines or their reserve schedules at the same exact time it does the line holders. So everyone's going to get their award, and then they'll have a 48-hour period to adjust it, and then it'll get published for the finals, and then it's going to take slightly less time to run all of the solutions as well. So I think it'll probably be about 2 or 3 days shorter. So everybody will get their schedules slightly earlier in the month.
Okay, interesting. And that's interesting about no build-up lines and reserve being awarded at the same time. That is an interesting development. So then reserve schedule holders, it would be several days earlier compared to what they're getting right now. Yeah. Cool.
It'd be about a week earlier for the reserves.
That's a nice difference, a nice change of pace. I'm sure they will appreciate it greatly. Jay touched on this a little bit earlier as one of the potential cons, and especially that came up during negotiations, but how do we expect PBS to impact vacation time? I know that's one of the hot topics.
Current book vacation as a line holder, if you have the seniority to hold a 4-on-3 off schedule for the month, you can get 17 days off in a row because you'll just take your vacation, put it over those 2 4-day trips, and with the 9 days off, as well as those 8 days you're dropping, it's 17 days. With PBS, it's different. You don't bid the line and then put your vacation over it. Your vacations can be pre-populated into the PBS system, and then the PBS system builds your schedule around that. So currently we have
so 5 days
block.
of vacation might only actually be 5 days off. Okay, don't scare me like that.
Currently we have 5-day blocks of vacation that credits 4.2 hours of pay per day, so it's 21 hours of pay. With PBS, it's going to be a 7-day block, and each day credits 3 hours of vacation, 3 hours of pay. So it's still that same 21 hours, but it'll be spread over 7 days versus 5 days.
Okay.
There's going to be different bid options.
Okay.
Credit windows. You'll have the normal credit window, which we currently have now. That's the only credit window there is. And then there'll be a high credit window for people that want to make a lot more money and work more. But then there will also be a low credit window.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm not sure if I know the numbers exactly, but I believe the virtual credit that you get per day of vacation is 3.5 hours, which will be 24 and a half hours for the week. So if a pilot bids vacation that month and gets 24 hours or 24 and a half hours of virtual credit, as well as bids the low credit window, and it's already 24 and a half hours towards the hours needed to stop adding flying to your schedule. Then they'll be able to just, if they have the seniority and don't really care about anything except for getting as much time off as possible, then they can bid the really highest credit lines. And if they can find 4-day trips that are crediting 20 hours or 21 hours, something along those lines, they'll be able to get even more time off than they currently get. Most of the trips aren't going to be crediting that high of a value, but there are some out there.
Interesting.
Some of the other things that we talked about with PBS, and that's in the TA, is days off on either side of your vacation. It'll be 2 days off that you can put on the front or behind your vacation, or one on each day, and the company agreed to that. They also agreed to being able to shift your vacation either 3 days in advance or 3 days forward or after, either way. They didn't agree to do both of them. They did, however, tell us that if NavBlue says they can honor both of those requests, then we'll be able to do both. But right now, they're just saying a pilot can elect to do one or the other, and they're guaranteed to do it.
Interesting. So you can either request to place 2 of your minimum days off at the beginning or the end of your originally requested vacation block, or you can move your originally requested block 3 days in either direction.
Yeah.
Got it. Interesting. So based on the new vacation system, it would be whenever you submit your bid for your vacation time, I'm guaranteed 7 days in a row off. And then anything beyond that kind of gets into the wiggle room of my preferences, as well as some of the persnickety details of how PBS actually works.
Yes. And you can actually make that 9 days guaranteed off if you elect to do those 2 days as well.
Got it.
Instead of adjusting the days that you actually have off.
Interesting. So definitely a little bit of a change from the way it works currently, but I definitely understand where you guys are coming from as far as still trying to make it as manageable as possible for the pilots.
That was definitely our biggest challenge.
Is there anything else, Brandon, that you would like to add, or, information that you specifically want our pilots to know at this point in the process as far as PBS humming in the near-ish future, but knowing that it is still obviously all tentative and there is that implementation process timeline that we're still working with. So it's still going to be several months before any of this is implemented at best. So as far as where we are in the process right now, what is it that you would like our pilots to know short term?
Right now, with the whole implementation process, it's still months until we actually get implemented. We were highly cautioned and warned to not implement it during specific times of the year. We were told not to implement it during the peak travel season of the summer, as well as the winter holidays. So with everything we know now, we know that we can either implement it in kind of early spring or late winter, early spring to have everything ready to go before summer gets here, or if we miss that window, then we'd have to do it after summer during the fall. So earliest we could possibly see it rolling out would be early spring next year, but probably more realistic with how long it's going to take for NavBlue to do everything they have to do, maybe the fall.
Okay, good to know. So no urgent changes coming immediately. There will be some time for everyone to start to adjust to things, which is probably for the best given how complicated everything sounds right now. But I know it is something that everyone is looking forward to long term. So once again, thank you for all of your hard work in getting us to this point where it is on the horizon of being implemented. Just very much appreciated. With that, we will go ahead and wrap things up. Unfortunately, we did lose Jay along the way, but we do thank him for joining. And thank you again to Brandon, who has now been on 2 out of 3 episodes of Pede Monsters. So basically the star of the show.
All right, thanks so much. Have a good one.